Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. Water-hammered tile, I slid his phone from the sink gap, screen up. One preview sat there like a dare, a heart bounced after Cassie's name. I didn't breathe, my thumb hovered and pressed, the lock blinked open. If I hesitated, I knew I'd start lying to myself again. I'm Maya, 22, I learned to move fast when it hurts. Face in the mirror, jaw set, no pep talk, just motion. A new message stacked over the first like a countdown. Tonight after the mixer, same plan, no witnesses, my stomach clenched hard. The shower knobs chirped, pipes shifted, I wiped the glass with my sleeve. Footsteps, he hummed that lazy tune he uses when he hides things. I tucked the phone back where the ring of soap lives. My pulse pounded against my molars, footsteps stopped at the door. Towel, his knuckles tapped wood, light, casual, not innocent. I cracked the door and handed it over, eyes on the knot. His fingers brushed mine, warm, familiar, suddenly distant. The knob didn't turn again, and that stall said enough. I slid the lock, quick, quiet, the fan masked my breath. Notifications pulsed once more. Cassie's contact photo smiled like a test. Kitchen at 9, back lot after no phones, code words. I memorized the beats, then erased the view with one swipe. He coughed in the hallway, I pocketed calm like a borrowed coat. The sink hissed as I pretended to rinse nothing. I opened the door and met his grin with neutral air. He leaned in for a light kiss, my cheek stayed still. Headache, I touched my temple, he studied me, then looked away. His towel slipped a little as he reached for the mirror. He adjusted his hair, not the moment, that told me plenty. I stepped around him and counted 3, exit clean, nerves buzzing. In the living room, my bag waited like a small exit sign. I checked the inside pocket for my roommate's tiny tracker. She lent it after midterms with a smirk and one rule. Use it only if I already knew the answer. The apartment door clicked behind me, I breathed street air, no relief. He texted a selfie in the mirror with a wink. Gym later, love you, I typed a dot and deleted it. My hand shook and I let it shake for once. Back inside, I matched his rhythm with a new plan. He moved around me making noise that meant confidence. I timed his steps to the fan, then to the fridge hum. Every beat taught me where he would slip next. As he dressed, I scrolled our group chat like a detective. Memes, game times, one linked to a mixer flyer. Cassie reacted to his joke with 3 fire emojis. He laughed out loud in the hallway, wrong timing, wrong joke. I walked to his car for the charger I pretend to need. Bent at the bumper, I slipped the tracker into the dark. A magnet snapped once, my heart snapped twice for symmetry. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell and I froze mid-reach. A neighbor turned the corner with takeout and gossip eyes. I smiled and lifted the charger like a trophy I wanted. She kept moving, bored, good. I kept moving, not bored. The magnet held and that click felt like a fuse. Back upstairs, he tossed me his hoodie like a peace flag. I caught it without looking and folded it slow. He watched for softness like he always does after scheming. I gave him neutral ground and his shoulders dropped 1 inch. Tonight's mixer, he said, hands in pockets, bounce and heel. I nodded once, I might swing by after errands. He kissed my forehead, then checked the clock over me. That glance wasn't love and my chest knew the math. He left first, door shut, silence settled like a held breath. I opened notes and typed a tight checklist. Record confirmed, decide, no speeches, no rescues. If the truth blinked, I would force it to stare. At 8:30, I slipped on shoes and left without perfume. No scent he could follow, no tells he could spin. The sidewalk felt like a conveyor towards something ugly. I kept pace anyway because delay would rot me. The frat block throbbed 2 streets over, familiar noise, unfamiliar tone. I stopped by a cafe window and watched my reflection hard. You already know, I told the girl inside that glass. Prove it clean or accept the rot and live small. 9 sharp, the tracker pinged a small dot near the house. He arrived early, eager beats careful every time. I walked on, turned once more into a version of calm. If I flinched now, the rest of me would follow. The line moved fast, wristbands, laughter, doors that never really close. Cassie stood near the porch with that practiced welcome. Her gaze skimmed faces until it hooked mine. She smiled like she'd already won, and that helped me focus. I slipped past her orbit and counted exits without staring. Stairs, kitchen door, side gate wedged by a brick. I set a timer for 11 with the sound off. Every second between now and then would sharpen me. He materialized near the beer table with a casual stretch. Our eyes met, he lifted a cup like a toast. I lifted water and tapped the rim once, Nutra. L music. Cassie watched the exchange and the air tilted. I threaded through bodies as if searching for someone else. My shoulders brushed strangers who smelled like sugar and trouble. I found a quiet corner and typed one line to myself. Do not ask questions tonight, deliver answers, then leave. He appeared at my elbow with an easy grin. Stay long, his voice carried that new distance. I sipped and let the silence chew a little. Maybe, I said, and his smile stalled mid-curve. Cassie drifted over with a glittering laugh that stuck. She touched his sleeve like they shared a punchline. Her eyes flicked to me, then past me like a door. Back soon, she breathed, and the word soon crawled. My timer pulsed on my wrist, 10:52 now. He was already angled toward the hallway like a habit. I let him go, I counted 3, I followed slow. Each step wrote a promise I would not break. I tailed him into the hallway, crowd noise thinned and sharpened. He checked his phone with a quick thumb and a quicker smile. A door cracked near the stairs and Cassie slipped through sideways. I counted 3 beats and moved after them, pulse hunting answers. A guy in letters blocked my path with a sloppy toast. I clinked his cup and kept walking, eyes fixed on that door. From inside, low voices, a muffled laugh, a zipper whisper. I leaned closer until cool wood touched my forehead, daring me. 11 on the dot, his voice carried that eager tilt again. Backlot first from her, clipped and businesslike, no romance. Phone's dead, he answered, knuckles brushing something metal. The door brushed my shoulder and I stepped away like smoke. I turned into the bathroom and ran water to cover breath. On my wrist, the silent alarm inched toward the time we feared. I messaged my roommate one word, live, then locked the screen. The mirror showed a stranger with steady eyes and a plan. Cassie exited with fresh lipstick. She didn't see me. He came out adjusting his collar, shoulders squared for mischief. I passed them without a glance and slipped toward the side gate. Every step felt like cutting cord by cord, never tidy. By the kitchen, a couple argued in tight whispers about rules. I swung around them and pulled the gate with careful fingers. Night air hit and everything went crisp, decision air. I set my recorder to standby and hid the screen under fabric. The yard stretched quiet except for shoes on gravel behind me. I ducked near the hedge and let 2 brothers stumble past. One muttered a bet about points and names I recognized. The other laughed like cash already counted, and I froze. My phone buzzed twice, tag active near the dumpsters. Not yet 11, but close enough to set my angle now. I cut across the grass and checked the fence for blind spots. Footsteps approached from the porch, and I stilled under branches. Cassie's silhouette flashed near the corner. She scanned and texted. A car door clicked on the street as if signaling her. She slipped her jacket off her shoulders and tied it tight. Then she paced 3 steps, rehearsing whatever came next. I circled to the driveway and saw him pass the kitchen window. He handed a cup to a pledge and clapped his back twice. Confidence always made him loud, which made him traceable. I fell in behind him at distance, counting his turns like stairs. Inside again, I cut through a crowd that smelled like syrup. He loomed near the back exit, watching the clock above the pantry. Cassie brushed his sleeve and tilted her head toward the yard. He nodded once, then checked the hallway for quiet. I reached the coat pile and fished out his spare fob. A quick press, one blink on my phone, confirmation locked in. If he tried to ditch the ride, I'd still know. I slipped the fob back and wiped my hands on denim. A pledge jogged up with flyers and nerves, blocking my lane. "Have you seen Cassie?" he asked, breathing like he ran sprints. I pointed down the corridor and watched him scrape his shoe. He bolted and the corridor cleared like a planned corridor. 10:59, my watch pulsed once like a hammer. I slid to the exit and pushed it open with my hip. Music fell behind me and the yard swallowed the rest. Gravel shifted to my left and I raised the phone. There, two shadows at the far end, bodies almost touching. Cassie's laugh landed low and flat, not playful at all. His hand found her waist, then paused when she tensed. "Make it quick," she breathed, and he breathed quicker. I recorded audio first and checked the waveform for spikes. Their words turned clear as if handed to me on a tray. No strings from him, too smooth for someone who cared. Just score from her, and the word burned like a match. A porch door creaked behind me and I crouched behind bins. Two more figures cut across the yard and stopped short. "Back lot," one whispered, excited and cruel in equal measure. My timer chimed once against skin and everything aligned. Cassie tugged his sleeve toward the alley and he followed. I stayed low and trailed the path through weeds and gum. They reached the corner where street cameras never cover. He checked both directions with a thief's patience, then smiled. "Now," he said, lifting her wrist as if sealing a deal. She lined in, then pushed him back with two fingers. "Condom," she whispered, bored, like this was paperwork. He patted pockets and swore under his breath, careless. I inched closer, breath tight, footsteps placed between their words. My hands steadied because anger steadies when it needs outcome. I captured another minute and filed it in the folder marked later. Then I stepped into the spill of the alley and waited. Their heads snapped toward the noise I made on purpose. He squared up like a kid caught shoplifting and still lying. Cassie's mouth twisted, then relaxed into a glare. "Lose your way?" she asked, eyes flicking to my phone. "Found it." I lifted the screen and watched their faces sink. He started a protest that even he didn't buy. "Spin it," I offered, resting against the wall like I had time. He swallowed and something behind his eyes flickered hard. Cassie cut in with a shrug that held no shame. "Not your property," she said, chin up, ready for heat. That told me everything about her stake and his script. I let the silence stretch until both shifted their weight. My watch buzzed again, tag on the car rolling awake. He reached for his pockets, maybe keys, maybe distraction. I moved first and blocked the path with one step. His jaw worked and his pride cracked right down the middle. "Back lot," I said, voice even, recorder still running. "Or we finish here with an audience through those windows." Cassie exhaled through her nose and rolled her shoulders once. "Fine," she said, and started walking like a leader into darkness. I followed at a distance that felt surgical and sure. Every footfall measured, every choice trimmed to its edge. Whatever I still wanted from him dissolved with each step. By the time we reached the cars, I was someone new. Gravel echoed under their shoes as they cut behind the house. I kept a car between us and watched their shoulders align. Cassie's hand brushed his wrist, then dropped when he looked around. I raised my phone and armed the mic without blinking. They stopped near the dumpsters and faced each other like teammates. Quick lap from her, brisk, already bored by the ritual. After the tally from him, voice lower than usual now. I edged closer until their words shaped clean edges. A pledge slipped out the side door and froze at the sight. He turned away fast and fumbled with keys in a panic. "Clock it," he muttered into his screen and hurried off. My chest tightened because that sounded like a system. Cassie pressed him to choose a spot away from lights. He steered her toward the rear gate with a confident nod. I shadowed them along the fence and kept my steps slow. One wrong pebble would blow the whole approach. They paused where the alley bends and cameras can't catch angles. He dug for something and came up empty with a curse. She rolled her eyes and checked her pocket like a fixer. I hit save on the clip because denial dies with playback. I triggered his trunk remotely and let the latch pop once. Both heads whipped toward the noise like deer before impact. Cassie hissed a question and he lifted his empty hands. I didn't touch it, he insisted, and my pulse steadied. I stepped out of shadow and let them see my calm. His face rearranged into the version made for excuses. Cassie's jaw tightened as if calculating damage versus time. Looking for recycling, I said, and held the phone higher. Delete that, he reached out, then pulled back like it burned. You must be joking, I answered, leaning against the cold bumper. Cassie shifted weight and scanned the windows for witnesses. Her silence admitted more than any script could cover. A car rolled past the mouth of the alley and lingered. The passenger lifted a camera and snapped a quick shot. He waved at them like this was a prank gone sideways. They drove off cheering and his bravado cracked. I opened our messages and dragged my thumb across the screen. A new bubble from an unknown number blinked for attention. Scoreboard at midnight, it read with a link and code. My throat went dry because the door finally swung open. I tapped once and a login screen asked for initials. He lunged a step and I slid left without effort. Cassie blocked him with her forearm and stared at me. Pick your letter, she said, tone flat, eyes furious. Not playing, I closed the page and copied the address. Then I sent the image to my backup chat with one line. Hold this tight, more coming in 5. My hand steadied the way a surgeon steals up. He pinched the bridge of his nose like a tired tutor. I swear it's nothing, he tried, but the word rang hollow. Cassie squinted at him as if heary. NG that for the first time. Her mouth curled and the alliance thinned. A whistle cut from the porch and 2 guys drifted over. Time, one tossed out, glancing at their watches in sync. They clocked me and stalled, waiting for a signal. No one breathed and the night leaned harder. I moved first and flipped the camera to their faces. Want your feature, I asked, keeping the lens steady. The taller one peeled back with both palms raised. We're out, he muttered, and they slid away fast. Cassie looked at me, then at him, then back again. Decide, she told him, voice clipped, patience gone thin. He stared at the ground like it would open and help. I tucked hair behind my ear and pressed a new button. Live stream engaged and a small counter ticked numbers upward. His eyes darted to the icon and widened with real fear. Cassie swore under her breath and stepped 3 paces back. I lifted the audio nearer and waited for the crash. He tried a grin that never reached his eyes. Let's talk somewhere quiet, he offered, palm turned open. Here is honest, I answered, checking the time on my wrist. Midnight crept close and the scoreboard would sing. He glanced at the gate like a runner eyeing lanes. I blocked his line with one easy sidestep and a stare. Cassie laughed once, then choked it off when he flinched. Your move, I told him, and silence rattled. A distant shout rose from the main house and broke. My stream count jumped as if dragged by that noise. He swallowed and finally spoke a sentence I could use. Call it off, he begged, and the ask landed heavy. Who holds the board, I asked, keeping my tone level. Cassie kicked a pebble and watched it skitter to drain. Officer handles uploads, she murmured, then bit her lip hard. That title told me exactly where to aim next. I cut the stream and saved the file to 2 folders. Around us the party swelled like a tide creeping closer. He reached for my sleeve and I let him touch fabric. It did nothing and his hand fell empty. Keys, I said, and held out my palm without shaking. He stared like I'd asked for his spine and then reached. Metal hit skin with a clink that echoed too long. Cassie watched that transfer and looked almost amused. I pressed the alarm and bathed the lot in noise. Heads turned from the porch like moths to a siren. Walk, I told them, and started toward the steps. Neither argued, and the crowd made room like it knew. Inside the threshold, I slowed enough to measure faces. The officer popped into view near the stairs with authority. He clocked our trio and started toward us with purpose. I smiled because the next fall was finally in reach. He cut through bodies toward the stairs while people parted on instinct. Cassie kept half a stride behind him like a witness choosing angles. I matched their pace and kept the keys tight in my fist. The one we needed waited at the landing with folded arms. Got a minute, I stopped one step down and blocked his path. He scanned my phone and then my face, weighing both options. Cassie lifted her chin and tapped her wrist like a clock. The officer's mouth twitched, then he nodded once, cautious already. We moved into a side room where the noise softened to static. He closed the door with his heel and leaned against it like a guard. I opened my gallery and let a thumbnail roll across the screen. He looked, then looked harder, and his confidence slipped a notch. Open the portal, I kept my voice even and my feet planted. No need for drama, he rubbed his forehead and checked the door. Cassie crossed her arms and stared at him like a stranger. He pulled a lanyard from his pocket and hesitated a breath. I stepped closer and held the mic inches from his chest. He swallowed and unlocked a dusty laptop on the table. A homepage blinked alive with neat tabs and a bland logo. He hovered the cursor until his hand stopped shaking. User, I pointed to the field and waited without blinking. He typed slow, careful to hide letters from my lens. Password next longer, a nervous glance tossing sparks toward Cassie. The dashboard loaded and a counter ticked up like a slot. Rows appeared with initials and numbers stacked in tidy columns. Clips sat in a library labeled with dates and shameless captions. A button marked Submit pulsed at the top like bait. My stomach tightened and then locked into something colder. Export all tonight, I stretched my thumb toward the share icon. He chewed his lip and tried a sleepy smile that fooled no one. Cassie watched the screen and shifted like guilt finally fit. He clicked download and a progress bar crawled painfully slow. The door rattled and a pledge peeked in with wide eyes. The officer snapped his fingers and the kid vanished backward. I took that as proof of rank and pressed record again. Cassie dug nails into her palm and studied the floor. A chat window pinged and stole focus from the files. New message from Ahmad with a crown and a timestamp. Totals by 12, the text flashed along with a grin emoji. The officer reached to close it and I caught his wrist. Leave it, my tone came out flat and final. He froze, then huffed through his nose like an animal cornered. Cassie shifted to the side and checked the hall for shadows. Nothing moved, yet everything felt ready to break in too. He clicked the archive and a menu opened with group roles. Treasurer Rush Risk Media, names shortened into neat masks. I scrolled without touching, eyes moving and brain stitching. Patterns emerged and tightened like knots I could pull later. Why keep faces? I nodded at a folder marked highlights. He shrugged, then regretted that tiny shrug immediately. Cassie leaned over his shoulder and tapped a thumbnail once. A still frame appeared and her jaw set like concrete. It wasn't tonight, it was last semester with different players. Same corner, same scheme, same grin pasted over nerves. Her eyes closed for half a second and reopened sharper. I filed that shift away because it would matter soon. The progress bar hit 90 and paused like it enjoyed cruelty. Boots thundered near the hall and someone yelled for refills. I braced my back against the door and felt vibrations. Time pushed on us from both sides, hungry and loud. He moved to cancel the transfer and I lifted my phone high. Try it, I told him and showed the live counter ticking. His hand retreated like it touched a burner he deserved. Cassie exhaled through her nose and finally spoke with purpose. "How many wagers tonight?" Her voice carried ice and command. He flinched at the word wagers and glanced toward his screen. "7," he murmured, then corrected with a cough and a flinch. "8 with alternates," he added, and the floor tilted. I copied the download link and sent it to my backup. 2 checkmarks confirmed and a small weight left my ribs. I saved locally too, belt and suspenders for dirty games. The bar completed and the folder bloomed open. "Now notify," I said, and pointed to the leadership channel. He balked and looked to the ceiling like it could forgive him. Cassie brushed his shoulder and held up 3 fingers steady. He breathed in and typed a message to the full board. "Security audit underway," he wrote, hands trembling over the keys. "All recordings frozen," he added, and hit enter with a twitch. Pings exploded like fireworks we didn't want to watch. My live counter surged again, and I let it surge. Behind me, the handle jerked, and a voice demanded entry. The officer twitched, then motioned for me to step aside. I shook my head and tipped the dresser against the frame. The voice cursed once and stomped away, but not far. Cassie pulled her phone and filmed the monitor without commentary. No smirk, no flirt, just clean capture and a steady wrist. She looked at me like a truce carved from sharp rock. I gave a short nod because we both needed the cut. The officer's screen flashed a red banner about policy breach. A timer counted down to some automatic purge he forgot to disable. "Stop that countdown," I ordered, and he fumbled for settings. He found a toggle and smashed it with a panicked thumb. I opened voice memos and held the speaker close to his mouth. "Explain the rules in full," I said, each word a blade. He stalled, then started with the cadence of someone reading. "Points for secrecy, bonuses for proof, penalties for witnesses." Cassie made a tight sound that wasn't surprise and wasn't relief. I logged his rundown and mirrored the file into cloud storage. He kept talking because fear talks when it needs mercy. The picture turned complete enough to move to the next step. "List admins by title," I pushed, and he stared at the floor. He named them fast like ripping tape, each roll landing heavy. Every label drew a path I could follow with my eyes. I felt something resolve that had been wobbling all night. From the hall came the chant of a crowd pulling together. We were out of borrowed minutes and the door showed it. I pocketed the drive and the link and my pulse steadied. "We walk out now," I told them and lifted the lock. The officer reached for his laptop and I covered the lid. "Leave it open," I warned, and let the threat hang. He nodded and backed away with both palms visible. Cassie pulled the door and the hallway swallowed us whole. Faces turned like cameras as we stepped into the current. A whisper ran ahead of us and multiplied at every doorway. He tried to touch my elbow and I angled out of reach. We hit the stairs and the chant grew teeth. At the base, 3 guys formed a block and stared me down. One smirked like he practiced being dangerous for mirrors. Cassie cut across their line and tilted her head once. They hesitated just long enough, and I slid through the gap. The officer followed, pale now, clutching his own mistake. I pointed to the living room where the biggest crowd clustered. We stepped onto a chair because height buys seconds. I held my phone up and met 100 hungry eyes. "Files are secured," my voice carried clear and steady. "Board has been notified," I let the words land and dig. A wave of murmurs broke into questions before I finished. I raised a hand and the room quieted like it learned obedience. In the doorway, the pledge from earlier hovered with his screen. He filmed me and then the officer and then Cassie. "Zoom in," I told him, and he obeyed without argument. I tapped the link and the board page opened to totals. Gasps hit like slaps as the columns filled to the edges. Names blinked into view as avatars lit green one by one. Someone cursed and knocked a stool into a wall hard. Security moved toward us and I smiled with my teeth. "Delete," a voice barked from the back, thick with authority. I turned the phone around and rolled the audio we captured. The room listened because proof makes silence spread fast. By the end, someone near the door started to clap slow. No speeches, I ended the clip and pointed to the officer. "Confirm," I told him, and he nodded like a man drowning. He confirmed, and with that the crowd split into currents. Some surged at the board members, others stared at me like verdict. I climbed down and handed the drive to the pledge. "Make 3 copies," I instructed, and he sprinted like purpose. Cassie touched my sleeve, not soft, just deliberate. "Next move," she asked, and the question wired my bones. "Police," I said, and the word drew a bright line. Her mouth pressed flat, and she nodded one time. The officer sagged against the wall and closed his eyes. Behind us, the party finally understood that midnight was over. We cut through the crowd and hit the porch fast. Cassie matched my stride without a word, jaw squared hard. He trailed behind us with twitchy hands and darting eyes. Sirens echoed faintly from somewhere close, and heads turned. At the curb, a rideshare slowed and then punched away. I waved the next one and yanked the rear door open. He hovered by the steps like a kid outside the principal. "Get in," I said, and my voice left no space. Cassie slid beside me and opened her camera again. He climbed in last and kept staring at my screen. I shared the cloud folder with 2 more backups. The driver glanced up at the mirror and waited for directions. "Central Station." I held his gaze until he nodded once. The car lurched forward and party noise fell behind us. He tried a smile that belonged in someone else's mouth. Cassie checked the time and tapped a new message out. My wrist buzzed, unknown number with a single line. "Don't escalate," it warned, followed by a location pin. I screen captured it and blocked the sender without pause. Cassie raised an eyebrow and I shook my head once. He lined in like we were planning a surprise for friends. "We can settle this with the chapter advisor, too." Night. I turned my camera on him and waited for courage. None arrived, and he sagged back against the seat. Another ping, a clip dropped from an unlisted drive. I opened it and watched him in a different parking spot. Different girl, different night, same routine, same jokes. Cassie flinched, not at him, at her own reflection. "How many more?" I asked, eyes on the counter. He swallowed and tried to invent a number that sounded small. The driver cleared his throat and pretended not to hear. I saved the file twice and named it with tonight's date. We turned past campus housing and a patrol car rolled by. Its lights stayed off, but the silhouette read everything. He shrank in his seat as if glass could hide people. Cassie steadied her breathing like she was learning to swim. Another text hit, this one from a girl I barely knew. She wrote 3 sentences that cut through every justification. He promised loyalty, then dared her to compete for points. I sent her my drive link and told her to keep receipts. My phone vibrated again with a payment notification. Tiny amounts from 5 names, each with smug little notes. I scrolled the memo field and felt something sharp click. They weren't scoring hookups, they were paying bounties. "Who handled the money?" I kept my tone even and low. He stared at the floor mat and chewed his cheek raw. Cassie turned her screen to show a transfer list. The same symbol repeated beside every payout like branding. We hit a red light and the driver drummed the wheel. I zoomed on the emblem and matched it to a sticker. It wasn't random, it was their house crest stylized for cash. Cassie whispered a name and my stomach hardened. He lunged for my phone with a sudden, clumsy grab. I leaned back and shoved his shoulder with my forearm. The driver barked a warning and slowed near the curb. "Hands to yourself," I said, and he folded, eyes glassy. Cassie angled her camera at his lap and held steady. "Try again," she told him, almost bored now. He didn't. He stared at his palms like they might confess. I wiped sweat off my wrist and reset my grip on control. The station came into view with a quiet, watchful front. We rolled to the drop lane and the car stopped hard. I paid on my app and stepped onto the sidewalk. He stayed in the back seat, an extra heartbeat too long. Inside the lobby, I asked for an officer on duty. Cassie stood beside me and locked her phone live. He kept a half step behind like he wanted cover. The desk clerk took one look at our faces and waved us through. We sat in a small interview room that felt tight. A female officer entered with a tablet and a measured blink. "Tell me precisely," she started, voice neutral, posture ready. I placed the drive down like a chess piece. Cassie shared the cloud link with a single gesture. I opened the betting transfers and pointed out the crest. The officer typed notes with quick, efficient movements. Then she called a colleague and asked for financial crimes. He tried to talk first, and I lifted my palm. "After her," I said, and the officer nodded lightly. He folded his arms and stared at the wall. That pose looked practiced, and it annoyed me. I gave a clean timeline with zero filler. Key moments, clips, user roles, payment lists. Cassie added the lineup of names tied to tonight's schedule. The officer's jaw tightened once like something clicked. He finally spoke and reached for remorse like a prop. "I got pulled into it," he started, eyes shining wet. Cassie let out a quiet breath that wasn't sympathy. The officer lifted her hand and he stopped mid-sentence. Two detectives entered with a printer humming behind them. They placed waivers on the table and pushed pens across. I signed with a steady hand and filmed my own signature. Cassie did the same, then handed over her copy. He hesitated until the officer quietly counted down. At 2, his fingers shook and the pen slid. He scratched his name and looked 10 years smaller. I watched without flinching because softness had cost enough. A detective opened a live trace on the payment app. Names populated a list that stretched past the screen. The crest repeated beside leadership accounts and burners. Cassie exhaled a curse under her breath, short and lethal. The officer asked for my devices for a brief pull. I mirrored everything and kept originals in my bag. "Chain of custody," she said, and I nodded hard. We both understood speed mattered more than style. He tried again with a new tactic that smelled like strategy. "If we go public now, innocent people get dragged." His voice wobbled on the word innocent and hung there. I tilted my head and waited for him to hear himself. The detective printed one sheet with transfer totals. He slid it across to us and tapped the largest sum. A counsel position took the highest rake from every pot. Cassie's lips pulled thin and her eyes got dangerous. Alarms chirped in the hallway and footsteps hurried past. The officer unlocked the door and spoke to someone outside. "Hold the exits," she told them, crisp and clear. She came back in and locked eyes with me. "Are you safe to go home?" she asked, not soft. "I will be," I answered and meant it this time. Cassie looked at me with a measuring glance. Her nod said we had an understanding that lived beyond tonight. He reached across the table like we were still we. "Please," he whispered, pupils wide, shoulders collapsed. I slid my chair back an inch and his hand hovered. The inch felt like a mile I needed. The officer gathered the drive and handed me a receipt. "Expect follow-up within 48 hours, she said firmly. She gave us a case number and a direct line. I saved both and set an alert for morning. We stepped into the hallway and the air felt different. Cassie leaned against the wall and stared at the ceiling. "I'm done with them," she said, voice rough, eyes clear. I believed her because some doors only close once. My phone vibrated with a flood of new messages. Girls I barely knew sent clips and screen grabs fast. The pattern grew teeth and a spine in minutes. I forwarded everything to the detective with one word: incoming. He exited last with an officer shadowing his steps. He tried to catch my gaze and got nothing. Cassie pushed off the wall and met him at the doorway. Apology later, she said, accountability now, and walked past. Outside, campus felt quiet and enormous and ready for change. I stood there with my hands empty and finally steady. The worst part wasn't doubt anymore, the worst part was truth. And truth, once named aloud, never behaves.